The music pulsed through the backyard, filling the warm night air with a vibrant beat. Sarah surveyed the crowd of friends and neighbors, a smile spreading across her face as they laughed and danced, drinks in hand. This was her 25th birthday party, a milestone she had been eagerly anticipating. But just as the revelry reached its peak, the piercing wail of a siren shattered the festive atmosphere. Sarah's heart sank as a police cruiser pulled up to the curb, its flashing lights casting an ominous glow over the scene. She watched, frozen, as the officer stepped out and approached the group, his expression stern. "Ma'am, we've received a noise complaint from one of your neighbors," he announced, his voice cutting through the sudden hush that had fallen over the party. "I'm going to have to ask you to turn down the music and have everyone clear out." Sarah felt a surge of panic and frustration. This was her party on her birthday. How dare someone call the cops and ruin her celebration? Swallowing hard, she stepped forward, determination etched on her face. "Officer, is there really a problem?" she asked, her tone laced with defiance. "We're just a group of friends having a good time. Surely we can keep the music down a bit without having to shut everything down completely." The officer's brow furrowed, and he shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I have to enforce the noise ordinance. If the music isn't turned down and the party doesn't start to disperse, I'll have to issue a citation." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she glanced around at her guests, who had fallen silent, their expressions a mix of confusion and disappointment. With a resigned sigh, she turned to her friend, Alex, and gestured toward the speakers. "Looks like we have to shut it down," she murmured, her voice tinged with frustration. "Can you please turn the music off?" Alex nodded, his face etched with concern, and moved to comply. As the music faded, the partygoers began to reluctantly gather their belongings and file out of the backyard, casting sympathetic glances at Sarah. Once the last guest had left, Sarah turned to the officer, her jaw set with determination. "This is unfair," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's my birthday, and my neighbors have the audacity to call the cops on me. I should be the one to file a noise complaint against them." The officer regarded her with a neutral expression. "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but the law is the law. If you have any further issues, you're welcome to file a formal complaint. But for now, I'd suggest keeping the noise down and letting your guests leave peacefully." With a final nod, he returned to his car and drove away, leaving Sarah alone in the suddenly silent backyard, her birthday celebration in ruins. Sarah stood in the backyard, her eyes fixed on the empty space where the police cruiser had been moments earlier. Anger and disappointment churned within her, fueling a growing determination to seek retribution. Turning on her heel, she stormed back into the house, her mind racing. She had to do something. She couldn't let her neighbor's spiteful actions go unchallenged. As she paced the living room, a plan began to take shape in her mind. "If they want to play dirty, then so be it," she muttered under her breath. Snatching up her phone, she quickly scrolled through her contacts and pressed the call button. "Hey, Alex," she said, her voice tense. "I need a huge favor. Can you come back over? I have an idea, and I'm going to need your help." Within minutes, Alex was back in the backyard, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on, Sarah?" "I thought the party was over." Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. "It's not over, Alex. Not by a long shot. I'm going to teach that nosy neighbor a lesson they'll never forget." She quickly explained her plan, watching as Alex's expression shifted from confusion to incredulity. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. That's crazy, Sarah. You can't just do that." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Watch me," she retorted. "That jerk ruined my birthday, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. Are you in or not?" Alex hesitated, his eyes darting around the now empty backyard. "I don't know, Sarah. This could get us in a lot of trouble. Maybe we should just let it go and try to salvage the rest of the night." Sarah's face darkened. Let it go. After what they did, No way. This is personal, Alex. I need you to have my back on this. Please. Alex sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. All right, fine. But if this goes wrong, I'm not taking the fall for it. A triumphant grin spread across Sarah's face. It won't go wrong. Trust me. She quickly began to lay out the details of her plan, her voice low and urgent. As the night wore on, the sound of a siren once again pierced the air, followed by angry shouts and the slamming of a door. Sarah and Alex watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. The tables had been turned, and this was just the beginning. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruiser cast an eerie glow over the quiet suburban street as the officer approached the front door of the neighboring house. Sarah and Alex watched from the shadows, their breath held in anticipation. With a firm knock, the officer announced his presence. This is the police. We've received a noise complaint from one of your neighbors. Please keep the noise down, or we'll have to issue a citation. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of angry footsteps as the door swung open, revealing a middle-aged woman in a bathrobe, her face twisted in fury. Noise complaint. She spat, her eyes narrowing. I'll have you know that I was just in the middle of an important phone call when your siren went off and disrupted me. I should be the one filing the complaint against _you_. The officer held up a hand, his expression calm. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I'm simply here to address the complaint we received. If the noise level is too high, I'll need you to keep it down. The woman scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. This is outrageous. I'll have your badge for this. Just wait until I call the mayor and... Ma'am, please, the officer interrupted, his voice firm. I'm simply doing my job. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll have no choice but to issue a citation. I suggest you keep the noise to a minimum for the rest of the evening. With that, the officer turned and headed back to his car, leaving the woman seething on her doorstep. Sarah and Alex watched, their eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as she slammed the door with a frustrated huff. I can't believe that worked, Alex murmured, his voice tinged with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Sarah's lips curled into a triumphant grin. I told you it would. That'll teach them to mess with me on my birthday. She glanced at her watch, her expression growing more serious. Okay, we've got to get out of here before they figure out what happened. Come on, let's go. The two friends quickly made their way back to Sarah's house, their hearts still pounding with the adrenaline of their daring plan. As they stepped through the door, Sarah let out a long, weary sigh. Well, that's one way to end a birthday party, she muttered, shaking her head. But at least I got the last laugh. Alex chuckled, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. I still can't believe you did that. It was crazy, but kind of brilliant too. Just promise me we won't get arrested, okay? Sarah offered him a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Alex. As long as we keep our mouths shut, no one will ever know it was us. She paused, her brow furrowing. Although, I can't help but wonder if this is the last we've heard from the neighbor. Something tells me this isn't over yet. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly. Groaning, she reached for it, her eyes narrowing as she saw several missed calls and messages from an unfamiliar number. Apprehension coiling in her stomach, she pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear. Hello, she answered cautiously. Ms. Richards, this is Officer Daniels from the local police department. A stern voice replied. I need you to come down to the station as soon as possible. We have some questions about a disturbance that occurred last night at your neighbor's residence. Sarah's heart sank, and she swallowed hard. Officer, I'm not sure what you're talking about. What disturbance? We received a call from your neighbor claiming that someone made an illegitimate noise complaint against them shortly after the incident at your residence, the officer explained. They're alleging that it was a retaliatory action, and we need to investigate further. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to formulate a response. Officer, I can assure you that I had nothing to do with any kind of retaliation. My birthday party was shut down last night, and I was just as upset about it as anyone. Be that as it may, Ms. Richards, we still need you to come down to the station and answer a few questions, the officer insisted. Failure to cooperate could result in charges being filed. I'd suggest you come in as soon as possible. With a resigned sigh, Sarah agreed and disconnected the call. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling slightly. She had been so sure that her plan would work, but now it seemed that her neighbor had figured it out and was determined to make her pay. Glancing at the clock, she knew she couldn't delay the inevitable. Steeling herself, she quickly got dressed and headed out the door, her mind racing with possibilities of how this could all play out. As she pulled into the police station's parking lot, a sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She had never been in trouble with the law before, and the thought of facing potential charges was enough to make her palms sweat. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the doors and approached the front desk, her voice faltering slightly as she spoke. Hi, I'm Sarah Richards. I'm here to speak with Officer Daniels. The receptionist nodded and gestured toward a hallway. Right this way, ma'am. He's been expecting you. With a growing sense of trepidation, Sarah followed the receptionist, bracing herself for the confrontation that lay ahead. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she was ushered into a small, sterile-looking interrogation room. Officer Daniels sat at the table, his expression stern and unreadable. Have a seat, Ms. Richards, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Hesitantly, Sarah complied, her hands gripping the edges of the table as she waited for the officer to speak. Now, he began, leaning forward slightly. I'm going to be direct with you. We have reason to believe that you or someone you know deliberately filed a false noise complaint against your neighbor last night, shortly after the incident at your residence. Sarah felt her stomach twist with anxiety. Officer, I can assure you that I had nothing to do with that. My birthday party was shut down, and I was just as upset about it as anyone. I would never retaliate by filing a false complaint. Daniels regarded her with a skeptical gaze. That's a very convenient story, Ms. Richards. But the fact is, we have evidence that the call came from a burner phone registered to an address associated with you. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. What? That's impossible. I didn't do anything like that. You must be mistaken. The officer shook his head. I'm afraid not. The owner of the home has also identified you as the person they believe was responsible for the retaliation. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. But why would they think it was me? I've never even had any issues with my neighbors before. This doesn't make any sense. Daniels leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. That's what we're trying to determine, Ms. Richards. And that's why I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you or anyone you know file that false noise complaint? Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she considered her options. She could try to deny it, but the evidence seemed to be stacked against her. And if she was caught lying, the consequences could be even worse. Swallowing hard, she met the officer's gaze, her voice trembling. I did file a complaint, but it wasn't out of retaliation. I was just so upset about my party being shut down, and I wanted to get back at my neighbor for ruining my birthday. Daniels nodded, his expression unchanged. I see. Well, that's a serious accusation, and one that could have some serious legal implications. I'm going to need you to come with me to provide a formal statement. As the officer rose from his seat, Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. Wait, does this mean I'm under arrest? I didn't mean for any of this to happen, I swear. Daniels held up a hand. For now, you're just a person of interest. But I would strongly advise you to cooperate fully with the investigation. The more forthcoming you are, the better your chances of avoiding any formal charges. With a heavy heart, Sarah followed the officer out of the interrogation room, her mind racing with the implications of her actions. She had never imagined that her attempt at revenge would lead her down this path, and now she was facing the very real possibility of legal consequences. As she was escorted to a holding cell, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Sarah sat alone in the cold, stark holding cell, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. She had never imagined that her impulsive act of retaliation would lead her to this point, facing the very real possibility of criminal charges. As the minutes ticked by, the gravity of her situation began to sink in. She had let her anger and frustration cloud her judgment, and now she was paying the price. The thought of a criminal record, or even jail time, terrified her. Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the cell block creaked open, and Sarah looked up to see a familiar face. It was Alex, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Sarah, what the hell happened?" he asked, his voice hushed as he approached the bars. Sarah's shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky sigh. "I'm in big trouble, Alex. The police think I filed a false noise complaint against my neighbor as retaliation for shutting down my party." Alex's eyes widened. "What? But how did they find out it was you?" "Apparently they traced the call to a burner phone linked to my address," Sarah explained, her voice tinged with despair. "And my neighbor identified me as the one who did it." Alex ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed with worry. "Damn, Sarah. This is bad. Have they charged you with anything?" Sarah shook her head. "Not yet, but the officer said I could be facing some serious legal consequences if I don't cooperate fully with the investigation." Reaching through the bars, Alex grasped Sarah's hand, his expression earnest. "Look, you've got to tell them the truth, Sarah. Trying to cover this up is only going to make it worse. You need to come clean and hope they'll go easy on you." Sarah felt a pang of fear in her chest. But what if they don't? "I could end up with a criminal record, Alex. My whole future could be ruined." I know, Alex replied, his voice low and soothing. "But trying to lie your way out of this is only going to make it worse. You have to be honest, for your own sake." Sarah nodded reluctantly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Okay, I'll tell them everything. But I'm so scared, Alex. What if they lock me up?" Alex offered her a reassuring smile, though the worry in his eyes was evident. "I'll be right here, Sarah. I'll do whatever I can to help you through this. Just focus on telling the truth, and we'll figure the rest out, okay?" Sarah nodded again, taking a deep, steadying breath. She knew Alex was right. The only way forward was to come clean and hope for the best. But the weight of the consequences loomed heavily on her heart as she waited for the officers to return. Time seemed to crawl as Sarah sat in the holding cell, her mind consumed by the uncertainty of her situation. The gravity of her actions had finally sunk in, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret for her impulsive decision to retaliate against her neighbor. Just as the anxiety was threatening to overwhelm her, the heavy metal door swung open, and Officer Daniels stepped into the cell block, his expression stern. "Ms. Richards, I'm ready to continue our discussion," he said, his voice level. "If you'll come with me, we can get your official statement on the record." Sarah's heart raced as she stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. As she followed the officer out of the cell, she caught a glimpse of Alex, who offered her an encouraging nod. Once they were seated in the interrogation room, Daniels folded his hands on the table, his gaze fixed on Sarah. "All right, Ms. Richards, let's start from the beginning. I want you to tell me, in your own words, exactly what happened last night." Taking a deep breath, Sarah launched into her explanation, laying out the events of the party, the police shutting it down, and her decision to file the retaliatory noise complaint. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her, and she struggled to maintain eye contact with the officer. When she had finished, Daniels regarded her with a measured expression. "I see. And you're admitting that you were the one who made the false noise complaint?" Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, that's correct. I was angry and upset, and I wanted to get back at my neighbor for ruining my birthday party. But I know now that it was a terrible mistake, and I'm truly sorry. Daniels leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. Ms. Richards, I want you to understand the gravity of what you've done. Filing a false report with the police is a serious offense that can carry significant legal consequences. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, and she fought to keep her composure. I understand, officer. I'm prepared to accept whatever punishment is deemed appropriate. I just hope you'll consider the fact that I'm being truthful and cooperative. The officer nodded slowly. That will certainly work in your favor. However, the decision ultimately rests with the district attorney's office. They'll review the evidence and determine if formal charges are warranted. Sarah's heart sank at the mention of potential charges. Is there anything I can do to try to avoid that? She asked, her voice trembling. Daniels regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Well, one option would be to make amends with your neighbor and see if they're willing to drop the complaint. But that's ultimately up to them. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the implications. I understand. Thank you, officer. I'll do whatever I can to make this right. As Daniels escorted her back to the holding cell, Sarah couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. If she could somehow convince her neighbor to drop the complaint, maybe she could avoid the worst-case scenario. But the road ahead was uncertain, and she knew she had a long way to go to regain the trust and respect she had lost. With a heavy heart, Sarah sat in the holding cell, her mind consumed by the uncertainty of her future. The weight of her impulsive actions had finally caught up to her, and she was now faced with the very real possibility of facing criminal charges. As she waited, the sound of the heavy metal door creaking open once again drew her attention. This time, it was not Officer Daniels, but rather her neighbor, Mrs. Simmons, standing outside the cell. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she met the older woman's gaze, prepared for the anger and resentment that she was sure to see. But to her surprise, Mrs. Simmons' expression was one of calm contemplation. Mrs. Simmons, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? The older woman sighed, her brow furrowed. I've been thinking a lot about what happened last night, Sarah, and I've decided that I'm willing to drop the complaint, but on one condition. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope flicker to life within her, but she dared not voice it. What condition? She asked, her heart pounding. I'd want you to come over to my house and apologize, face to face, Mrs. Simmons said, her tone resolute. I want to hear you acknowledge that what you did was wrong, and I want you to promise that it will never happen again. Sarah nodded eagerly, the relief washing over her. Of course, Mrs. Simmons. I'll do whatever you ask. I'm so sorry for what I did. It was a terrible mistake, and I regret it more than you can imagine. The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I'll speak to the officer and let him know that you've agreed to the terms. But Sarah, let me be clear. If you ever pull a stunt like that again, there will be consequences. Understand? Yes, I understand, Sarah replied, her voice trembling with gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. Thank you so much. With a final nod, the older woman turned and left the cell block, leaving Sarah alone once more. But this time, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She had avoided the worst-case scenario, and now she had the chance to make amends. As Officer Daniels came to escort her out of the holding cell, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. She would go to Mrs. Simmons' house, apologize sincerely, and do whatever it took to regain the trust and respect she had lost. It wouldn't be easy, but Sarah knew that she had learned a valuable lesson. That actions have consequences, and that sometimes the best way to make things right is to face those consequences head-on. As she stepped out of the police station, she caught a glimpse of Alex waiting for her, his expression a mix of relief and concern. With a deep breath, she approached him, ready to confront the next chapter in this unexpected saga.